Welcome everybody to the Captain's Log, where we are going to discuss different things about the Speech and Communication Center with Dr. Misty Knight. I am Taylor Polonichka, and I am the GA for the Speech and Communication Center this semester. You want to introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Dr. Knight. I have been in the Human Communication Studies Department since 2008, but I have been teaching at some, capacity at the college level since '96. So it's been a day or two. My background is kind of a generalist, but political rhetoric and feminist rhetoric, a lot of stuff dealing with motherhood and interpersonal relationships.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, we will start off with our questions. I'm going to start off with kind of a more broad question. What are some of the biggest challenges people face when it comes to communications?
I think for the most part, it's an issue with listening and awareness that most people are thinking about sort of their perspective and their thoughts and what they want to say, and not always gleaning the true intent or message behind the person speaking. As humans, we are fallible, we are flawed, and we're always going to have our own sort of lens over everything. And so, no matter how innocent something might be, when I say it, you may take it a different way because you've had a bad day or because someone else said something mean to you. It could be a challenge to really understand the message that someone's sending.
So then what are some of the challenges you have had over the years? If you could give an example.
Um, you know, I think one of the areas that I have found that is not just in my discipline, but in others as well, that academics are often drawn to a field because of some sort of deficiency in it. I grew up in a family that didn't really communicate openly about much of anything. And so um, I was always sort of mesmerized by families that talked to each other. And so um, in addition, I had, a lot of like many teenage girls, a lot of self-concept issues, and very insecure. And so there were just a lot of communication patterns of, being quiet, trying to kind of hide in the corner, that kind of thing, and not really being able to express how I felt or what I was thinking. And so I think about that progression over time. When I found the communication studies department as an undergrad, I kind of fell into it. And I was like, wow, so this is like this is how people work. This is what makes them tick. This is how relationships are built. And I started finding that by kind of researching and exploring that it helped me to apply those lessons in my own life.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who go into the psychology field have similar situations, from my experience, from what people I've met. But in comparison to that, what are some of the successes you have found along the way, of strengths you have, or things that you've overcome?
Um, I think one of those areas that we talk about a lot of times within communication studies, working in groups and leadership and those sorts of things. I really struggled when I was younger with that idea of how do I take leadership? How, what what should my demeanor be? What should, and so I have found over the years kind of my own path, my own direction, and it has become more natural. And I think just that element of sort of as I grow older and that level of maturity as it develops, that I have just sort of grown into my own skin. And so I feel more confident and in what I'm saying, or when I'm talking to classes, and as well as in those leadership positions within committees or in community events and that sort of thing.
And that kind of leads me into my next kind of question is, working in groups, especially for students and classes, what kind of advice do you have, especially in terms of if you're in a group and there are people who aren't, putting in as much effort or not really contributing in as much, what kind of advice do you have for students?
That's always so tricky, and probably the most common complaint that I get from students is that there's some type of group project and someone's not pulling their weight or won't respond. And it's incredibly difficult because you can't make someone feel a sense of responsibility to a project. If they don't feel it, you're not going to be able to guilt them into it or force them into it. And so at that point, in many cases, I sort of recommend, cutting bait and moving on. If you have talked to that person, addressed the concerns specifically, I recommend using I language and supportive communication when you use a formula of behavior, effects, and feelings, and sort of combining the statement that says, here's specifically what is happening, here's how I feel about it, and here are the effects that it's having on me. So in this group situation, you have not been responding to our group texts, or you did not show up to our meeting. We are feeling frustrated. I am feeling overwhelmed with the amount of work, and we're not going to be done in time. And most reasonable people will hear those things and be able to piece that together and say, ooh, I don't want to be the cause of these bad things. And so if you can craft that in a supportive way and talk about it in a supportive climate, then it tends to be more effective. But like I said, if you're not dealing with a rational other person, or if you are dealing with someone who just doesn't care, that's the point at which the rest of your group just needs to get together, divide the work evenly, and just leave that person behind.
Um, in that same vein, I know from this past semester and with everybody going on to online classes and working remotely, things are new to a lot of people and things are different. You don't have that opportunity to go and meet somebody, or you see them on campus and be able to say, hey, did you do this already? Can you help me? So what do you think are good strategies for online group projects?
That's a great question. And I'm trying to figure that out right now because I'm trying to figure out how to make my group project work for my intro class. So this is something that I talk about in my classes, especially when we're talking about kind of group things, but when we're talking about how to make requests of people. So imagine that you and I are face to face, and I say, hey, Taylor, I need some help getting such and such done. Can you come over at 3 o'clock tomorrow and help me with that? You are going to feel much more compelled to do that than if I sent out an email, especially if it was a blanket email to the whole class, just saying, hey, could anybody show up tomorrow at 3 o'clock to help me do such and such? I mean, if you think about it, if you've got other things going on, you're you have no reason to show up. You're not going to. But if, especially in a face-to-face situation, if I ask you directly, you're much more inclined. So when we are facing this pandemic situation with online education, we've got to figure out other ways to do that. And so that's where, I guess, increased levels of communication, especially if you can have these sort of face-to-face meetings through Zoom, or other types of meet up, even if you're using Facebook Messenger, the video chats, or something along those lines. But something to kind of give you a little bit more of that interpersonal experience where it is more like face to face. And so building that up and then maintaining consistent communication. So don't communicate erratically with others, sort of a here and there and here, but have a routine or a plan for each day. Hey, at 5 o'clock, we're going to just check in for 15 minutes or whatever it may be. And that tends to help kind of keep everybody focused and in this heading in the same direction.
Yeah, I have definitely experienced where somebody sends out an email or shoots out a request saying, hey, who wants to do this section? And everyone just kind of sits there and is like waiting for somebody else to do it.
Right.
All right. What is something that you wish you could teach or, have students learn outside the classroom or for them to use outside the classroom?
That's tough. I think sort of a love of learning. When I go into my classes, I love my discipline. That's why I do what I do. So I am totally geeked out by it. I go in and I'm all excited and I'm like, ooh, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. But people who don't want to learn for the sake of learning, they're there to check something off, on a list of gen ed requirements or whatever it may be, that don't have that passion for learning. It makes it challenging. And so I think we have developed a system of education in our country where it's focused about those outcomes of, what's your GPA at the end? Is it high enough to get you into a good college? And once you're in college, is it high enough to make you noticeable? What are your SAT scores? Those sorts of things. I would like to see us move past that into a learning for the sake of learning, so that we can be more well-rounded people, more just as individuals, so that we have a greater, firmer understanding. But just sort of that passion for learning new things that, that's why I like documentaries and such, because I learned something that I wouldn't have studied otherwise, and it's done in an entertaining way. And so it's just sort of that picking up new things. And so I think the passion and love for learning.
And a similar question, I don't know if your answer might be the same, but what do you think is the best lesson that students can learn in their education that'll help them in the future outside of school?
I think that failure is the best teacher. That don't be afraid of failing. Don't be afraid of completely messing up, or doing something wrong, because you don't know you're doing something right until you've done it wrong a few times. And then it starts to click for you as to why it's working the way that it's working. And you'll, once you figure out sort of the gears or the mechanics of how it's working, then later on, when you're encountering a new challenge or a new problem, you learn how to adapt and just adjust to that. So I think not fearing failure, accepting that, embracing it as part of the learning process. Now, I'm not saying go out and work hard to fail, as a student, but to understand that we're not always going to be perfect, and we shouldn't be beating ourselves up if we just don't get something the first time, or if something doesn't work the first time that we do it. So really persevering.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have a hard time with talking about things like hard truths or deciding whether it's better to say something or say nothing at all. And in those kind of situations, what kind of advice do you have for people when they're kind of stuck on, how do I communicate something that's hard for me to do or that I'm not sure I should communicate?
Yeah. Um, I think a lot of that is, a little bit of self-reflection or introspection. What is the reason why you're trying to communicate that? Is it out of hurt feelings? Is it out of anger? Is it truly out of love or caring to help that other person? Sometimes we feel like we need to set someone straight just to make ourselves feel better, but it's not really necessary or helpful to the situation. And so what is the purpose behind your communication? Really kind of looking into that and understanding that. And I think, just kind of going, I'm just trying to think where to head from that. I have completely lost my train of thought now, but I think just that understanding why we're saying what we're saying or doing what we're doing. And so when we have those hard conversations, that we're coming to someone in a place of love or in a place of building a relationship. And even if it's someone you really, really dislike, understanding that they are a human being and they deserve respect, and and that we need to treat others in such a way. For a long time, we've always been taught the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. But there's sort of a newer concept that, the platinum rule: treat others as they would like to be treated. And so really thinking about how you're treating someone else, they're going to be much more receptive to your hard truths if you are treating them with respect.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Moving on to kind of more of a different topic. What are some of the most significant differences you have seen between generations and how they communicate?
I think my parents' generation, born in the 1940s or so, they came from pretty stoic families that had been through a lot. Uh, World War II, the Great Depression, and so they experienced through their parents' eyes, kind of the hard truths of the world. And so they sort of learned to, it's that suck it up, buttercup kind of mentality. Um, and I think as we've moved on, there's been a little bit more openness, and particularly the generation that I'm seeing come on, those who are in middle school and high school now, are really much more open about all sorts of things than older generations were. Things that I never would have considered talking to my parents about, or sometimes even my friends, that it would have been an embarrassing conversation. They're talking about it openly and publicly. And so sometimes for me it's a little bit shocking. And for example, my parents, when they hear their grandkids, they're just like, who is this? What are you talking about? And so I think, in those levels or layers, we are seeing that people are much more free to express themselves and to be passionate, and it's okay to be passionate. It's okay to show emotions, um, and and there's an acceptance of that now that there didn't used to be.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of more of a fun question, I think. Um, what is a celebrity or public figure that you think um, shows bad communication skills and one that shows good communication skills, like something that they do that you think affects a lot of people?
I'll try to steer away from politics because we're all tired of that. Um, so someone that I think I'll start with someone I think has been positive um, is Cardi B, actually. She has, it's sort of that what we were just talking about being open and being vocal. She's really been open about her past struggles and things that have happened to her and in her life, and the things that she's overcome. She shows a sense of strength and determination, and really talks about what it takes to persevere and to keep working and going forward. And so she's open to talking about a lot of things that people didn't used to talk about. Celebrities wouldn't have ever considered saying some of the things that she talks about openly in interviews. Um, so I think the fact that she is so willing and open, and she's not always the perfect voice for feminist issues or um, social justice issues, but she's out there saying something, which I think is really important because so many people are afraid for their careers. They're not going to say anything because they don't want to be sort of ostracized. And so she's just going out and saying it, which I admire. Um, I kept hoping that as I talked about her, I would think of someone that would be a negative source. Um, I think one of the one of the celebrities that, and this is a little bit older now, but when certain accusations were made of Chris Pratt, for example, for anti-LGBTQ positions that and stances that he had, some social justice issues that were, sort of on the discriminatory level. He didn't address them in a very effective or open way, and tried to sort of dance around it. And in some ways, he's getting a pass for that. But people have long memories, and when you don't address it and say, "Hey, I screwed up," or "I made a mistake," or what have you, if you don't come forward and just be open to what has happened, um, I think in the long run it's going to come back and bite you. And so I think I would like to have seen him maybe go forward and learn something from the experience.
Yeah, and along those lines, this new kind of cancel culture where a lot of it is digging into people's past and
Mhm.
finding mistakes that they have made or times where they shouldn't have said something and now people are bringing it up so they can learn from it.
Okay.
What kind of is your opinion on that kind of, digging something up and then I don't a lot of times immediately somebody apologizes, but sometimes you wonder if they're being sincere and if they're
Sincere.
actually learning.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and there's a whole area within our discipline, apologia, that deals with self-defense rhetoric and how people will defend themselves. Do they admit their wrongdoing? Do they try to scapegoat someone else? Do they try to say, sure, I did that, but look at all these wonderful things I did over here? So what strategies are they using in self-defense? I think the term cancel culture is, I go back and forth with that one, because really what cancel culture is all about is consequences. You know, when you do something wrong, there is a consequence for that. Now, there are times in our past where we did something awful, and there's nothing we can do to go back and change that. But I think when that subject comes up, if it is sort of brought to the light of day, or if it emerges as a public conversation, that's where the person has to say, yeah, I made some really bad decisions. I was stupid, you know, or, you know, here's what was going on, not so much as a, you know, get out of jail free card, because there are always going to be consequences for those actions, but more as just a sign of being a decent person. We all screw up, and some of us have screwed up worse than others, and in public ways. And so I think being willing to admit that is a big part of moving past that. And so when we talk about this idea of cancel culture, it's often the people who are remorseless about the stupid stuff that they did.
I also kind of wanted to hear, what do you think has been like the most effective ways of communicating, both privately and in public situations, especially with songs and speeches and rallies and everything going on? What do you think has been most effective recently, especially with protests and rallies, of what people are saying at those events that kind of gets their message across?
Hmm. I think when people speak from experience, and when they're able to put their own personal stories into it and put themselves into it, it creates a much more compassionate speaker. You know, the audience is going to feel much more inclined to believe and support them, because they've developed this sort of credibility. That's why it's important to build a connection with your audience and sort of form that unity within the group. And that's where in protests and stuff, chants are so important, or songs. When people will all do that together, it creates a sense of camaraderie, or sort of a, you know, also arm in arm kind of, we really are together. And so then when the speaker uses that, and especially uses phrases from that will sort of trigger that memory or that instinct from the audience, it tends to be particularly effective. And so we think about sort of some of our better orators, and it we look at that idea of unification, rather than dividing, not the us versus them, but the here's what we can do for everybody, and talking about our personal experiences, and talking about the subject matter in a passionate way. Some people tend to get, well, and I do, when I'm nervous, I tend to go very flat, very monotone in speaking, which is bad in public speaking, because it tends to make the audience feel like you're robotic, like you're not feeling whatever it is. And so I have to be very careful about that, and use inflection, and make sure that I'm doing that, because otherwise it wouldn't seem authentic. It would seem like I was just rattling off some platitudes that anybody could say. And so I think that's a really important component as well.
Yeah, definitely. Um, is there some kind of something somebody has said to you, or something you've heard, or a speech that you heard that you kind of think about, especially through doing all of your work and with teaching, that you kind of has stuck with you for a while?
You know, it's sort of funny, because so many times, especially in contemporary society, things get memed. and then we, we'll hear a phrase over and over, see it over and over in a meme. And so sometimes it's hard to think of a whole speech or body of work or something. I think one of the more recent ones that comes to mind was when back in, I want to say November, maybe or December, Representative Yoho had called Representative Ocasio-Cortez, I'm trying to think if he said a fucking bitch or just called her a bitch publicly. And she addressed that on the floor. And she gave a very authentic, a very passionate speech about this is why you don't talk this way to other people. This is why you don't talk this way to your colleagues. This is why you don't talk this way to women. And I think it had a lot of levels of passion and righteous anger that deserved to be there, because you don't. That is not appropriate behavior. It's not okay. And, I like to curse probably more than the next person, but those kinds of names are saved for private conversations, not for, a public statement, especially when you're an elected official. There's a level of responsibility there. And so her speech on the floor, I thought was very passionate, very well written, gave great examples, and I thought really sort of moved this idea forward of how you treat women and how you treat your colleagues.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that as you were saying it. I can see her, and I remember that moment. So that it's definitely what she did was impactful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, I'll kind of close off with this. Kind of where do you see your field heading in the future? What kind of are your hopes for, human communication field going forward?
My greatest hope and dream is that people start recognizing the importance of it and embracing it. I think right now, when you look at it, employers, the top skills that they want, it's always involving communication. Employers are saying, we can train you to do anything, but not how to communicate or how to get along with others or how to work well as a team. And so people have to understand those types of skills. What used to be called soft skills, it's now often called social capital. But how do we use that social capital? How do we work with others, get along with others? And so my hope is now that employers are making this demand of college graduates, of their employees in general, that in education we start putting a little bit more emphasis on that. I think also as we're seeing so many social justice movements and protests and such moving forward, people are seeing the importance of just the everyday person being able to speak their mind, and even if they're afraid, still being able to speak up. And so to me, and I think, again, this is why I geek out over this stuff, this is why I'm so passionate about it, nothing gets changed without a person who has passion and is willing to speak for it. You will make all the difference in the world. That's how the world becomes a better place. And communication has the power to do that. And so if we would just take the time to learn how to do it and to do it effectively, I think we could move mountains.
Yes, that's very well said. Um, is there anything else you have thought about along the interview or something that you think you would like to relay to students or just anybody? Or if not, we can end it.
Nothing I can think of.
Okay.
Always read your syllabus.
Yes. Yes. That's something I learned in undergrad, like, just, like, the smallest things. It's very important.
Well, and I think, okay, so here's something. Um, your professors really do care about your success. We want to see you do well. We don't do what we do because we want to see people fail at it and burn out. I mean, there might be someone out there that does, but I want to see my students succeed. And so if they will come to me and show that I'm not getting it, but I need help, I'm going to work with them all day long until we get it down, until we get it right. And so we really care, and not just about your classroom success, but as you as a human being. We want to see you do well. We want to see you be happy.
Yeah, definitely. I've had many professors that I've had to go to, and just talking to them about, what's going on or why you got the grade you did so you can understand how you can, progress forward and do better is so important, especially with learning too. Just being able to like not being afraid to go up to your professor and say, I need help. Well, I thank you very much for doing
Absolutely.
this.